Welcome to the next podcast of Millinery.Info. I'm your host, Lauren Ritchie, and it's so wonderful to welcome you to this episode. Today we welcome Tommy Cobau to the series. He tells us about his beginnings in theatrical millinery, his time spent at the Met Opera, and now opening his own studio. I'd like to take a moment to say thank you to our wonderful Patreon podcast sponsors for their support of this series. Jennifer Hertz Millinery, the Millinery Retreat School of Millinery, HATalk Australia, Hat Academy, Hatter's Millinery Supplies, Judith M. Millinery Supply House, Hats by Lico, Lifted Millinery, Louise McDonald Milliner, Millinery Australia, The Hat Magazine, Barcelona Hat Days, and HATalk. You can find a link to these businesses in our show notes, either through your podcast app or across on the MillineryInfo website. I'd also like to thank HATalk and Hat Academy for including links to the podcast on their platforms. Thank you for listening today. If you've been enjoying this series, I'd like to ask you to head across to our Patreon page, and there's two ways you can sign up to show your support of this series and say thank you for the episodes we bring you each month. Thank you so much, Tommy, for joining me on today's episode of MillineryInfo. It's wonderful to welcome you to the series.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be here.
Could you take us back to the beginning of your millinery journey? How did hats and millinery come into your life?
So it all kind of started when I was in college. I went to school for costume design, and then I took a course in crafts, costume crafts and millinery, which then led me to getting a job at a summer stock Shakespeare company, where I was recovering a hat and did it successfully. And then they said, let's have you make a hat. And
He knows how
then
to do this.
yes, I did that successfully. And then it just kind of turned into them pulling things that they thought they were going to use from the past and having me make new ones. And then I spent the whole summer making hats instead of doing the variety of leatherworking and all the stuff I was supposed to do. So then went back for one more year of school, made hats then, and then just kind of went on from there. Just hats, 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 you know?
And still hats, 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 hats.
Yes, every day, hats, hats, hats.
When you were in school, were there dedicated millinery classes, or were you kind of pushing the bounds of making it a specialty?
There was one class, it was a semester, and it was crafts and millinery. So it was everything from mask making to thermoplastics to hat making. We made like one hat a week and did like I think a buckram, a cineme, a fabric, maybe one or two other things. And I think we had to do like a little exploratory on trimming, that kind of thing. But it was just a
Yeah.
couple weeks of like, here's how you do this, make one. Not
Yeah.
a real, course.
Yeah. Absolutely. Who was teaching the course? Were they a millinery background?
No, they're a costume designer local to Cincinnati. She's a costume designer and crafts person. She's an amazing crafts person. Her name is
Yeah.
Reba Sensky, and she is very crafty in a way where she takes unexpected objects and turns them into, beautiful things. Which is really great. It was a great like way to learn how to take like the top of like a to-go soup container and turn it into metal findings and things like that.
Wow.
But not like no formal millinery training for her as far as I'm aware.
Yeah. Were you making and creating before you went into college? Like, what were your sewing skills like?
Um, Before I went to college, I wasn't sewing too much. I started sewing like my senior year of high school. I made some costumes for a show in high school. I had been doing like fine arts and things since I was a child. So I was like, taking like art classes outside of school and things like that. And I had always done like art summer camps and pottery summer camps and things like that. But not really anything in the textiles world until
Yeah.
senior year of high school with the expectation to hopefully then pursue it in college.
Yeah. Fantastic. When you finished college, what happened next? Where did it take you?
So, the summer after I finished college, I went to the Santa Fe Opera, where I was a millinery apprentice under Deb Nash, who is an incredible milliner. And then after one summer with Deb, I moved to New York, where I got a job at the Lynne Mackey studio. I was at Lynne's through the next summer when I went back to Santa Fe for another year with Deb, and then came back and from there stayed in New York, worked for Lynne Mackey for a little while longer, and then worked for Arnold Levine for 5 or 6 years. So those are my next steps after school.
Did you were these jobs that you applied for? You just thought, I'm going to go to New York and see what I can make happen. How did they come about?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of like, my best friend from college had a degree in acting, so the two of us were like, let's move to New York together. It's really the only place where you can go without
Yeah.
the job and get the job, especially in theatrical hat making. Um, so we moved here, and then I didn't have too many pre-established connections from people in college. So I had heard of Lynne Mackey, but not a lot about the other costume craft shops and millinery shops. So I went into the Playbill archives on the Playbill website, and I went into shows like Beauty and the Beast, and that I knew hats and crafts, and
Yes.
went to the back and looked at the credits, and it would say
Yeah.
like a millinery by this person, and then I would Google that person, and then find some random email and shoot an email out hoping that it turned into something.
You're like,
Um,
hi.
yeah, yeah. And a lot of people at that time, I think, um, Rodney Gordon and Arnold, I think were both like, we don't have work at the time, but if you want to stop by, I'd like to
Yeah.
meet you. Lynn was like, I have work in a couple weeks. So I went and interviewed with Lynn. I think I moved in on a Saturday and I interviewed with Lynn on Monday. I got a 2 week little job for Radio City Music Hall on the Rockettes and then went into Lynn's and bunkered down in hat making. Um, but then, later on kind of became more connected after I was at Lynn's with who and what was available out there.
What were you doing? What kind of shows are you working on with Lynn?
I was initially hired because she got asked to do the first national tour of Aladdin. So they had built Aladdin for Broadway, but it hadn't gone on tour yet. So we built the whole tour, and she made, I think, half or a little more than half of everything in the show. It's a very big show.
Yeah.
So that was the main need to bring in more people. And then, of course, while you're there, I think that year we picked up a ballet for ABT called Whipped Cream. We did some things for Sunset Boulevard on Broadway. So, things come and go as you're kind of working on the longer show. Um, but I think that was that first year was primarily just Aladdin. And then I went back
Yeah.
to the Santa Fe Opera. So.
Amazing. When you're working with Lynn, what was that workflow like?
So working with Lynn's is, I mean, it's amazing and special because she really does like kind of give each milliner working under her the ability to make the hat in fruition if you have those skills. So she would like, talk through the design with you and talk through like her intention and her process, but then like you would pattern it, or you would block it and drape it. It wasn't really like a step by step working under her. There were people in the shop who worked under other people, but I got more of a chance to make from beginning to end, which was really nice and great because I learned a lot. You learn the
Yeah.
whole process of everything you're making as opposed to just the little snippets. So, yeah, that was that process.
Amazing. And then you went back to Santa Fe for a season?
Yeah, I went back to Santa Fe for a season, learned a little bit more from Deb. The whole team that had been there that first year came back. You know, had learned a lot at
Yeah.
Lynn's for the, 9 months I had been there. So I got to come back and kind of like settle into a little bit more. The first year I was in Santa Fe, was really like, hey, your wiring stitches aren't great. Hey, let's improve on
Lots of
this.
feedback.
Yes, this is how you properly do this. And so then I got to
Yeah.
kind of come back, I think, and, you know, I wasn't as worried, at least I don't think, about the basics at that moment,
Yeah.
So I got to learn a little bit more in depth from Deb that year.
Yeah.
Um, and then went back for a whole nother year with Lynne Mackey. So
Amazing.
yeah.
So cool. And from working with Lynn, what came next?
After Lynn's, there was like a brief little gap in the work. So I was, kind of scouting out for other options. So I reached out to Arnold Levine and he had just picked up a couple shows. I think at that time he was making things for Moulin Rouge and the Cher show because they were both in their like pre-Broadway builds.
Yes.
Um, and so I spent, I think, 5 years with Arnold's, and we did all sorts of things working for Arnold, everything from cruise ships to, Disney characters to Broadway to every once in a while, someone will throw in a little movie thing when you're working there. And he has some connections in the props world. So I even got to upholster some prop stuff and do things like
Wow.
that you don't normally get to do. But he has a lot of craft items that he does there. So
Yeah.
it was a lot of foam carving and antler making and helmet building and, got to learn a whole new side really than what I had learned at Lynn's, which was very, at least my time at Lynn's was very like couture women's wear and turbans and beading and embellishments. And Arnold's, I got to learn a lot more painting and thermoplastics and, all of these, just a nice new side of
Yeah.
theatrical hat making.
It could be so broad in terms of what people can like, what is headwear, and then
Yeah.
what is show headwear and
Yeah.
fastening it to the head and all the materials. It's so broad.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And what were some of the show highlights? What are some of the pieces that stand out to you from that
Oh.
time?
Show highlights at Arnold. I mean, at Arnold, I did get to start. I got to do a couple things for Wicked, which is the first time I got to work on Wicked, which is very exciting. They were rebuilds of like existing things. We did a lot for Moulin Rouge. Moulin Rouge to this day orders regularly from Arnold. So it was a lot of repeating through that. I think the things like the individual items that come to my mind when I think of being at Arnold's are all like one-offs. It wasn't
Yeah,
like a big show. It was like someone came in and needed this random thing. And then we kind of got to make that in the midst of making 30, goofy sailor hats. I got to pause for a second and make this crazy oyster head piece. And then it's like, those are the pieces, but you know, it is fun to you become like familiar with shows like Moulin Rouge, and the order comes
yes,
in for 8 more mini top hats, and you kind of just get to like settle into the order that you've done before, which is always really
yeah.
great.
So you just see repeats of the same styles coming back.
Yeah. Yeah, there would be times when I was at Arnold's where everything in the shop was just repeats of things we had made before. Um, which there is some like, it's kind of nice at times. You're not as, stressed about the process. You get to like sit in and refine the making.
Yeah.
But then of course when something new and exciting comes in, you kind of are like, yay. Yeah.
Would you see a change? Like, could you kind of tell when, if, would you get the old pieces back? Could you tell kind of, oh, yes, that was our second make and we're up to our sixth. So it's kind of evolved a little bit since then.
Yeah, I think we would at least see it in like the photos because every time you have to take photos and notes, and I think that sometimes we would send stuff out, and like to this day, I mean, some things are being delivered as we speak, and I'm like, well, for next time, and I know the
Yeah.
things that got delivered today are for a cruise ship, so I'm like, there will be a next time,
Yeah.
and for next time we should change this and we should change that and refine this. So
Yeah.
there's definitely that. You see the evolution go by.
Yes. And what was, I mean, such a journey so far, but then what came next?
So what came next was there was like a little sort of messy period, I'll call it that, where I was getting some work outside of Arnold's. I had started
Yeah.
working with New York City Ballet, and I had gotten an off-Broadway job and a national tour of Annie, and so I was kind of like contemplating stepping back to like a part-time
Yeah.
situation with him and had talked to him about that. And that is when Janet Linville retired from her 24 years at the Met. So
Yes.
I kind of saw that coming. I had heard that was coming and kind of
Yes.
like dove in and leapt. I was like, I want this job. I
Yeah.
kind of told everyone else that I knew who might be interested. I was like, I really want this job. So
I've heard a rumor.
yeah, yeah. I was like, I heard a rumor Janet's leaving, and I had one connection at the Met, so I was like,
Yeah.
pulling those strings of the people I knew there, being like, help me, help me. Um, so yeah, then I spent 3 years as the milliner at the Met,
Wow.
which
Yeah.
was amazing and wonderful, and it's a crazy huge job.
Yes.
Um, Tons of shows, 20 something shows a season,
It's huge.
six, seven new productions. Sometimes the shows have 300 people, like Aida, and sometimes everybody has one hat, sometimes everybody has four hats. You know what I mean? It's just,
Yeah.
You go from a day
Constant.
when there's an 18th century show and a 15th century show and then modern cowboys, and the ceiling is filled with trees covered in every type of hat you can imagine. Um, and you're just kind of like, where am I? What do I focus on now? But it's great, and it's great to be in the theater because, like what you were just talking about, in the theater, you do have kind of the responsibility of it's right there. You make the product and you send it to stage. So it helps because sometimes you get to kind of R&D things after they're finished. You get to kind of see if you made a mistake, but it's also, kind of not as
You also get to
fun.
fix it quite quickly, I
Yeah,
imagine, too.
yeah. They look at you and say, "Hey, fix this. This messed up," and you're kind of like, "Oh no." So
But also
yeah,
the workshop is right there with the theater. It's not that you're
yep.
sending it out and it's a disconnected thing. It's very immersive, the space, isn't
It's
it?
very immersive, and you're in the middle of making the next show. You're working on a new production that opens in like 2 months at the same time that you're working on a couple repertory shows that open in a couple weeks, and then there's a show that's in tech at that moment. So you're in the middle of building something while stretching something for another show, and then you get called down to rehearsal, and then you get brought to a fitting, and then you come back to the room, and there's the hat you're
Like, where are we
making
up
for
to?
the yeah, and then you have to reset and be like, okay, let's make that hat for a couple months from now. So but it is great, and it's great to see it all, and it's also amazing to be in the same space as all the other makers. um and it's you're in a space with garment makers and dressmakers and tailors, and so you have the ability to ask for help in a different way than I'd ever been able to experience.
Yeah,
Sometimes you are given things with a rep show where it's like, well, 25 years ago when this show started, this was made by the milliner.
yeah.
And so it has been considered a hat the whole time. You know what I mean? It's considered headwear because of this reason and that reason. And I'm sitting here like, okay, well, I don't, normally work with these materials or in this way. So then you can kind of go over to the dressmakers and be like, can you help me or can you advise me? And, sometimes it's like, is it a hat? Is it a craft item? Because crafts are their own thing there. I mean, it's all one room where you're blended, but there is a crafts person.
Yeah.
Um,
The job
so
has
it's
to get
like,
allocated to a department in some way.
yeah. And sometimes it's like, well, this show has a lot of crafts. So the craftier items, if they relate to a head in any way, come to the milliner
Yeah,
because the craftsperson is overwhelmed with 30 sets of armor. You know what I mean? So it's just kind of like, you never really know what's going to come next.
yeah, absolutely. And at the same time, are you still doing work with the ballet as well?
Yeah, so the whole time I worked at the opera, I was making things for City Ballet, which was very convenient because they are right across the street from each other. Um, and as time went on, I also picked up a bit more with outside work, and I did some Broadway shows, and all in kind of moderation as to what I could handle while having the
Having a
full-time
full
job.
time? Yeah.
Yeah, full time. So things really started to kind of shift and take a switch to more outside work. I would say it would have been 2 summers ago when the Rockettes had a change in their staffing and were looking for milliners to take on the refurbishment and rebuilding of different numbers in the Christmas spectacular. So I picked up at that time 4 numbers that pre-existed, and all 4 numbers worth of headpieces, which there are 82 Rockettes total.
A lot of head bases.
Yes. So all of them would get sent and to be refurbished, and then you rebuild replacements for the ones that were past the point of repair.
Yeah.
Um, and so that was kind of like a whole, you get the summer off when you're at the opera because the opera closes down. So that was kind of a whole summer. And then it
Yeah.
bled into the fall. And then from there, the work just kind of never stopped. So I think when we spoke to each other, when we did the Hat Magazine interview,
Yes.
I was in the midst of like full time at the Med, almost full time at home, and even had some part-time, independent contractors working for me just to kind of get everything done.
Yeah.
Um, but since then, I guess, in this past spring, I had left the Met. So I had a great 3 years with them, but that outside work kind of took over. So it kind of became to the
Yeah.
point of like, which one of these do I want to do? Because I can't continue both. Um, so I have left the Metropolitan Opera, but I am still a vendor for the Metropolitan Opera now on my own.
Oh,
So since then, well, we made about 60 Puritans for their New Year's Eve production of I Puritani, and we're working on things for Tristan and Frida y Diego right now. So still very much connected to the Met and still very
yeah,
much connected to the ballet. Just not
yeah.
located at Lincoln Center anymore.
Was there a particular draw? I think some people might think, "Oh my gosh, madness! Why would you, ever leave?" But was it a particular draw to be able to take on those freelance jobs and have your own space?
Well, I
Was it
think
for you?
it's always kind of been the goal. It's kind of always been what I've thought I wanted to do. Um, I very much loved my time at the Met, but uh, it does feel, I don't know if this is the right word. It feels like limiting at times, you know what I mean? Like it's all consuming. It is a lot and it's a lot of focus. And sometimes you're not making things. Sometimes weeks go by when you're not actually making things. You're refurbishing and cleaning and repairing um and sometimes because of the staffing and the space and all of that, the fun things for the new production, the big things for the new production have to go to an outside vendor because you have to look at the schedule and say, do we have the ability with these 6 shows before that new production to physically handle making these things? And so I knew that I didn't want to like end my time with them. So that's why when I
Yes.
left, I was like, I am opening a shop. So I would love to be the person who makes those fun things when the
That would make the
milliner
fun
here,
things.
bring those to me now. Um, but I think that there is something exciting. I love all of the hats in theater and everything. I've always had a soft spot for ballet headwear.
Yeah.
Um, and so, you know, I think that the lacking of all the different variety was kind of where I wanted to be. And, I really love doing craftier things and I love the spontaneity and the change and all of it. So I think that's what kind of drew me away from, of course, one of the few stable jobs in hat making. um,
But having said that, you've had quite a long, successful run too at freelancing too. So there's nothing, it was a good
yes.
indication that the work would still come through.
Yes, we definitely waited until the absolute last moment when it was like, we physically must decide here, do I stay or do I
Cannot
go?
work 24 hours a day, 7 days a
Yes,
week.
yes, something had to change. But, that was my thing. I kept on saying yes and yes with the hopes of building up enough that I
Yeah,
knew that upon leaving, there would be no concern, which is
yeah,
also one of the amazing things about the Rocket rebuilds every year is that hopefully, I mean, we just talked about next year, but it is a reoccurring thing that comes back every year. So when that was
yes,
kind of offered, I was like, okay, great. Here is some stability
yes,
in a very non-stable industry. So kind of helped forge the departure.
yes. And when you stepped out on your own and opened up your shop, what did that look like? What's the space like? Where did you start?
Okay, so it has grown exponentially and a little bit faster than I thought it would. But I rented a space in a costume shop. It's attached to a costume shop in Jersey City, New Jersey. So like right across from Manhattan. I'm located in New Jersey, so it was just kind of a better commute and situation for me. So they had a back space that they were looking to possibly sublease. So I moved
Mm,
into that. And started with like a little part-time help here and there and thought like, okay, it'll be me for a little while and we'll do some stuff. And then the work started to roll in and build and build. And so then I took on one full-timer and one part-timer, and then
amazing.
it turned into a full-timer and then a full-time apprentice, and then the apprentice became a full-time staff person, and now we're up
Wow,
to three people, three full-timers, one part-timer, and myself, all
amazing.
busy making hats. So quite a transition from July when
Yeah,
I like theoretically settled in and opened the space would have been the end of June and beginning of July. It's been quite a whirlwind, but
yeah.
I mean, I'm super grateful, obviously, and it's amazing, and very excited to be making all the crazy things we get to make currently, which is great. So
Very cool. Congratulations.
yeah.
That's such an
Oh, thank
amazing
you.
feat. And to take the dive in, it's very cool.
Thank you so much.
What is in the works? So whatever you might be able to share with us, what's on the workbench at the moment?
Um, so I mean, in the past couple months, we've worked on some exciting things. We did things for Ragtime on Broadway. We did the new play House of McQueen, which was all like replicas of really cool Philip Tracy pieces. And then we did Puritani for the opera. Right now, we're working on a project for Norwegian Cruise Lines. For that's new. We're working on three or four small things simultaneously for New York City Ballet. Um, and one of them is that we're remaking Diamonds, which is part of like George Balanchine's Jewels. So we're
Yes.
remaking the core of Diamonds. And then we have started making things for Wicked. So there's actually some exciting new designs going into Wicked to kind of supplement where swings have lost their individual hat and have become, kind of mixed into pieces from the past. So we are making some new things for Wicked, which is really great. And then there's this new Broadway show called The Lost Boys, which is based off of like an 80s movie. And so we are making a lot for that. So that's kind of what's currently in the shop. And then there's quite a few things kind of trickling in for the future, some stuff for ABT, a big production for New York City Ballet coming next, I guess it's next spring, but we've already
Yes.
kind of started on it. So, a lot and from a lot of places too currently.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I guess there are no two projects the same in this kind of work, but do you get good lead times? Do you get people in a panic? What's the kind of sense when someone comes to you asking to commission a piece or
I think
pieces?
it's like 50-50. I mean, I think right now there's a lot of stuff happening at the same time for Broadway. So we've got a lot of people who want things currently. And you know, it just depends on the place and the person. I mean, like, at the same time that we're talking about the show for New York City Ballet for next year, we're talking about things for a week and a half from now, So it is just kind of like we have a bit of deadline push up mixed with, okay, well, that thing's due in a month. Let's slide that to the side. So currently, this January, it's been a little bit of everything, which has been interesting.
Amongst your team, how have you been dividing up who's doing what?
Um,
How have you been running your workshop, your
Yeah, so
workspace?
I have, I mean, a great team of people, and all it I love them because they all have very different skill sets and very different strengths. So I've got one person who's definitely more crafts leaning, um, and I, slide things that direction, the leather working, all that kind of stuff that I know will like, satiate her over there. But I have kind of set it up in a way where because I'm new and everything up until now has been made by me, what
Mm,
I don't want is for anything that leaves the shop to not still look like my hats that people have been getting.
yeah,
So I'm very hands-on with everyone. Obviously it's a very collaborative process, and if, the person making it is like, hey, I think it would might be better if I'm doing it this way, then of course, we look into that, we see if that's best. But um, it is kind of I'm kind of primarily blocking, I'm kind of primarily patterning. Of course, there's times when that's not the case, but that way it's like, my hands are on the initial foundation and then we talk about the stitching and the assembling. If possible, I always like to keep a hat with one person all the way through because, I remember from when I was working in the shops, it's nice to, have the completion of
yeah.
this is mine. I made this hat. Um, but then, of course, some people have strengths over others or have just the knowledge. And so we've had some builds recently that have been a little bit fast. So it's like, hey, she's going to help you by making this while you're making that because she knows how to do those steps and you can do these things. And so, you know, we're all close and friendly and, everyone's kind of having a great time, I think, hopefully.
I'm assuming so. It sounds like a very fun time.
Yeah.
And how prescriptive are the designs when you're getting them through the door? How detailed are the concepts coming into you?
I think it depends on the designer. I mean, I work with some designers who I would say like entrust a lot more in me. And then I work with some designers who are just more hands-on. Um, and so it really just depends on the show. I mean, the interesting thing with, the opera and the ballet is that you're working through like an institution. So you're working through an individual as a part of that institution and then through them to the designer. So I feel like those are a much different process than working with some of the Broadway shows. Some of the Broadway shows, like The Great Gatsby have been running for a while and I've made things previously and work with Linda Cho very often. So, I think that there's a little bit more in trusting in me to make
Yeah.
some decisions, some solutions. I might have a trim that I could put in here where I think there might be one. I offer things a little bit more than working with some other designers where you know, everything's approved and set by the book.
Yeah.
Lost Boys, for example, they're all kind of like missing, I think they're called like missing persons. So they're like
Yeah.
vampire underground individuals. And they're all they're all very different, but very like grungy and gathered. So the design team just gave us like large bags of
Yeah.
yardages and stuff and things, and we are just kind of playing to
Making
get
hats
there.
from them.
Yeah, yeah. So we're just kind of like playing, exploring, making stuff. I know what their intention is, and I work with that designer, Ryan Park, pretty often. So I kind of know like he and I had a pretty long chat about like what his goals were. But that one's definitely more of a me involvement than some of the other ones where it's like I take I pin it together, I take a photo, I send it for approval, I get it approved, I assemble it from there, and I don't think that there's any process that I like or dislike more. Um, I think if we're talking like, timeline wise, it's nice if you're on a tight timeline to be like, this is what I want. I send it, you approve it, we move on. But if we've got
Yeah.
more time to work with it, then, playing is a milliner's best friend. You know what I mean? Like we want to play with trims and put flowers here. And you know what I mean? Like that's what we do. So
We'll use the time.
yeah, yeah.
And you spoke about materials. Do you always get delivered the materials you need to work with, or do you have a stock? How do you go about sourcing?
It depends. I mean, like, so standardly, I provide structural materials. Now, like that can change depending on the thing. And, if it's a 1940s felt hat, then the felt is the structure, so I tend to provide it and then get it approved. But these other things, these more like exotic stuff, I tend to ask for the design team to offer the materials. If I have something that could be a good fit, I tend to supplement it. If I have a trim, I think that might be nice. Or if I know like I would prefer to have this edge covered. It's going to be much easier if we don't have to perfectly sew that. So let's put a trim here. Then I usually like pull one from my stock or go like source something as like a sample. But it's millinery materials
Yeah.
and not every designer or assistant or shopper or swatcher knows what they're looking for. So
Yeah.
I tend to, if it's like something millinery related, I tend to offer the sourcing on my end to ensure that we can get the right thing. Because if you're working
Yes.
with the wrong material, it can really slow up the process.
Yeah. And then delays your start. You're
Yeah.
over to crunch time.
Yeah. And then, sometimes you can see it. Like I see in
Yeah.
the hats when it should have been felt, but it ended up being fabric covered or vice versa. Like you can see in the hat, it looks
It's the wrong form for the
cramped. And yeah,
material.
you can just see the torture that the poor thing went through to get to the right product, which we don't want. You know what I mean?
No.
So
We want it to be magic.
yeah, yes, absolutely.
How have the materials that you've worked with changed over your career
Um, well,
so far?
I think there was a moment in the US like a couple years ago where we thought buckram was gone. And it is, I believe, gone in the US, but we get it from England and it's wonderful and we love it. It's just been a change to get it. I mean, I think that uh in the time that I've kind of been in here, there's been the main thing that I see disappearing is like pretty straws. like decorative straws and things. I just don't feel like there is as much of a collection of them as there used to be available. And like millinery flowers, fabric flowers, and things like that are harder to source. You kind of have to like go on Etsy and buy it from someone whose job is just finding those and sourcing them. Um, but for the most part, we're kind of using the standard things. We use some thermoplastics, we use Shape at times. Um, but it's buckram, it's felt, wool felts, all of these kind of standard things. I use a lot of like the nylon corsetry meshes and things. There's a brand called Seafar that sells them. So I don't in New York we refer to almost all of them as just Seafar as the material name. But they make a nice, plastic meshes, nylon meshes make a nice good structural material if, it's not if it's patterned and not blocked. So change wise, I feel like we've kind of leveled out, which is good because there was a period of time there where it was kind of like, what are we doing? How are we going to make things? And I feel like we've leveled at the moment, so hopefully we can kind of stay there.
Yeah, some of the suppliers have been very innovative in filling. They saw the gap
Yes,
there or emerging and
yes,
started producing themselves. So it's a great
yes,
change.
yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And what has been one of the most challenging hats you've ever created? What stands out to you?
Oh, now you gotta make me use my brain. I don't know.
Sorry.
Challenging hat. I'm one of those people when someone's like, "Tell me about this one time," and I'm like,
This one time you're like, I don't know. I don't know
I
things.
don't remember anything anymore. Who am
I
I?
guess all it also leads to the uh you don't know how to do it, so you have to figure out how to do it kind of approach as well.
I mean, there's a lot. I feel like that is theatrical millinery, is that you don't know what's coming. You know what I mean? And you don't know what anyone's going to ask for next. So the next thing coming on your plate, half the time, I'm like, what is that? How are we going to make that? What is that made out of today? You know what I mean? And sometimes you have someone looking at you saying, yes, I know this hat's always been made that way, but in this production, they have to throw it at a wall. So it needs to be, bounceable or something,
Yeah.
So I
Or it
mean, it's
needs to
just
go
kind of
in
like,
water or be on
yeah.
fire or
Yeah, I feel like, the hats that end up being the most complicated and, the process is the hardest are the ones that I end up setting to the side and thinking are going to be easy and simple. I end up not putting as much forethought in, and then they sneak up behind you, and then you go to make them and you think like, oh, that one was going to be easy, and then you're in the middle of making it and you're like, whoa, 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 whoa. There's nothing easy about this at all. Um, but we do, I try to put in a decent amount of forethought before pencil hits paper to pattern or blocking begins or anything, if I can, to figure out like what it could be. I spend a lot of time on Pinterest and Instagram and in screenshots on my phone looking at this thing I found 5 years ago that could be helpful today in making trim for a wicked hat, So when I'm able to do that process, that definitely alleviates the challenge.
yeah. And you constantly in research and development about different concepts and what
Yeah.
techniques might be helpful.
Yeah. And with a show like Wicked, it's like it exists and it's existed for a long time and it has its own like language. So a lot of it was me like looking at photos of old Wicked hats. But then like, as I then like diving into Pinterest and looking at like weird things made out of horsehair and like sculptures that I don't even know if they're AI or real, but I'm like that looks like something that could be in the world of Wicked and I need something to make a hat out of. You know what I mean? So it is just kind of like dive, ooh, screenshot this for later, you know. Um, and then someone brings up something and then I'm like, oh, wait a minute. And I'm like deep in my phone.
I
Like
have the
six
answer
year
to this. I
six
didn't know I
years
needed
ago, I
it, but
took a
I have the answer.
screenshot. Yeah, I know. If I swipe long enough, I'll see that green photo from,
And I think a common question people ask about milliners is blocks, and having blocks on hand. What do you have as in your studio, and what are the most used ones?
Um, so I have about like 250-ish blocks, I think, maybe 300 blocks. I have quite a few blocks. I've sourced them from a couple of retired milliners and there's those millinery groups online and I'm always like buy, 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 buy. I go through waves where 3 months go by where I'm buying blocks, and then I'm like, whoa, what have I done? Um, I would say that I mean the ones I use the most, I mean it's interesting. You always want to buy those beautiful little shapes. And if, I was making my own brand of hats, I could use them in whatever way I wanted to. I find myself wanting to buy these like 50s puzzle blocks and they're gorgeous. And then you present them to a designer and they say, we're going to make these 50s hats. They send a rendering. They're like, I have this. It's kind of similar. And they're like, yeah, it is kind of similar, but I'd like that.
Similar, but not what I
And
want. Yeah.
yeah. So, I mean, the thing we use the most are like the basic utility crowns. We use them constantly. A lot of times it's like, let's block this on a utility crown, let's block it on a top hat block or a toque or something, and then stiffen it and then kind of like hand mold from there. I feel like especially with felts, it's just a lot of like post stiffening. Let's take it off and put it on a head and pull and stretch and pull and fold and cut and you know, um, kind of figure it out in the air.
Yeah.
Um, but I feel like I can never have enough utility crowns and I can never have enough shapes of them. And I do love, weird little bauble things. And, I've got a collection of like, we call them small shapes, but they're like,
Yeah.
just little wooden objects to push out spots. And, I've got one that's like the tip, it looks like the top of a crayon, but it is an
Yes.
antique metal funnel mold that they would hammer the metal
Yeah.
against. And my husband found it in an antique store and was like, hat block? And I was
You
like,
were like,
yes.
yes,
And there's like
good
those like
eye.
little wooden shoemaking, like they look like little maracas, but they're like the
Yeah.
shoemaking things. And I've made like cat ears on them as a little block. And like it's like you find these little weird things and then you end up like falling in love with it. Um, and like a wooden bowl makes a beautiful brim, and then you buy brim blocks and you don't end up using them. You use the same wooden bowl you used.
It
So,
was the right form. Yeah.
yeah.
If you've got a shape you have to be making multiple times, like you're going to do a random, will you make your own block for it? Like if it's
Yeah,
something that
so
you've
I
sculpted
mean,
or altered?
we do make blocks. I mean, for Puritani, I didn't have a size run of like your standard Puritan hat. So we did make like a size run of those and we made duplicates in a couple sizes just to like expedite the blocking process. Um and we do, I mean, like with Wicked and stuff, historically, Lynne Mackey and Rodney Gordon and the people who made Wicked, when they made them, after the first time, they started to make blocks, more permanent blocks to use for the making of them. So, with our Wicked hats, that has kind of come into the discussion once the things are approved and we're kind of moving through. Some of them will require their own block. And we do it, I mean, it kind of just depends on the thing in the day. I mean, sometimes I make like little toppers to go on to blocks. If it's something that like relates to a utility crown or another block, I'll make like a clay piece that is, encased in plastic and then it can live in its own little box. And then like you take this, you put it onto block number 24, and that makes this hat. But then for other ones, I, will carve the like insulation foam that you get in like sheeting.
Yeah.
And then we do a decent amount of like, you make the shape out of buckram, fall shape, whatever, and then like backfill it with like the two-part pour foams. So yeah,
So many skills.
I know. Yeah, it's just
But it's
you got to
constantly
figure out
evolving
what to
because, as
make
you
it
said,
with.
yeah, you don't know what's going to walk through the door next. You might not
Yeah.
have done it before, so it's going to be got to figure it
And
out.
you never kind of know if it's gonna be if you're gonna make it again. You know what I mean? Sometimes it's like with Puritani, I was like, we are going to make these blocks because I know for a fact that we will use a standard tapered shape in the future. Um, Other things you kind of like cobble together. And, I made a piece for the House of McQueen show that was this this Philip Tracy hat, and it has kind of like a base here and then like a big swirl that loops around. And of
Mm.
course, Philip Tracy has that block. I don't have that block. So I think it was a combination of like I blocked Bunkram on three different blocks and then like spliced them together and then fused them to each other so that you had this continuous shape. But if someone ever asked for that again, I'd be like, okay, we have to make a block now. You know what I mean? Like I'm not that was
That's not a
that was
one-off anymore.
yes, yes. If it was like, oh, this show's lasting years, we need more of these, I'd be like, oh, okay, like we need to actually do something here because that wasn't, it was a one-time deal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you've got to decide where the investment point is of, are we going to form this as a block for
Yeah.
longevity, or are we doing this once?
And I feel like you do get, I mean, that same shape came back on I got asked to give pricing like 3 months later, and someone had that exact same shape in a pricing packet that I did not end up making. But I was like, oh my God, twice in 1 year. Like what's happening? Like I didn't know that was such an expected shape for the moment. But you go through waves, you know what I mean? You make a ton of, at the same time we're making Puritani, we also made a production of Tartuffe, and then we made other things. We're making Puritans for like 4 places at one time. And I was like, why is everyone wanting Puritans? And then, you make stuff for it, and then in 2 years, no one wants it in, and then,
No one wants it.
yeah. And then you've just got the block, and then, it'll get dusty, and then in 10 years, someone will want Puritans again, and then you've got your blocks ready. So
Good to go.
to the storage unit they go.
But it's a difficult balance to decide when that moment is of like, yeah, we're going to buckle down on this shape, and we're going to invest in this
Yeah.
block form.
Yeah.
Well, we're so excited to see what's going to come out of your shop next, Tommy. Thank
Well,
you
thank
so
you.
much for joining me on the podcast. It's so exciting to hear what you've been up to, and we're watching with eager eyes to see what's next.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been so great. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining me for this episode. I hope you enjoyed hearing about Tommy's career so far. Thank you so much to our Patreon podcast sponsors for their support and making this episode possible. Barcelona Hat Days, HATalk, The Hat Magazine, Millinery Australia, Louise McDonald Milliner, Lifted Millinery, Hats by Lico, Judith M. Millinery Supply House, Hatters Millinery Supplies, Hat Academy, Hatlux Australia, the Millinery Retreat School of Millinery, and Jennifer Hertz Millinery. Please head across to check out the links to these businesses either in your podcast app or across on the MillineryInfo website. While you're across on our website, you can also find some photos that go along with each episode. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm your host, Lauren Ritchie, and I look forward to talking hats with you again soon.